The most ancient alliance in Middle-earth was not broken by the shadow of a Dark Lord, but by a single, priceless necklace. This was a tragedy of greed so profound it makes the fall of Erebor to Smaug seem a simple matter of conquest. This was a bitter personal war fought over a work of art, culminating in the assassination of an elven king in his own treasury and the brutal sacking of the world's most beautiful city. It is a wound upon the history of Arda that never truly healed, poisoning all trust between two great peoples for thousands of years to come. This is the dark chronicle of the Nauglamír, the necklace of the dwarves, and the Silmaril of Fëanor, and how their union brought forth only death. Long before the sun first rose, in the starlit ages of the world, two peoples found common cause in the land of Beleriand. On one side were the Sindar, the Grey Elves, led by the mightiest of their kind, King Thingol, King Greymantle. He was a lord of the Teleri who had seen the light of the two trees of Valinor, and his queen was Maclean the Maya, a divine spirit whose power wove a veil of impenetrable magic around their entire realm. Their kingdom was Doriath, the land of the fence, and its heart was the city of Menegroth, the Thousand Caves. Carved deep into a stony hill by the river Esgalduin, it was a work of such breathtaking beauty and artistry that it was said to be the fairest dwelling of any king that has ever been east of the sea. And the elves did not build it alone. In their craft, they were aided by the dwarves. From the great mountain range to the east, the Ered Luin, came the Naugrim, the stunted people. They were a race ancient and proud, made not by the gods of the west, but by the Vala Atole the smith, in the deeps of time. From their mountain cities of Nogrod and Belagost, they delved for the treasures of the earth, for iron and copper, for silver and gold, and for gems of impossible color and clarity. They were the undisputed masters of stone and metal, and their skills were a marvel to all who beheld them. For millennia, a great friendship and a profitable trade existed between the elves of Doriath and the dwarves of the Blue Mountains. The elves traded their knowledge, their art, their fine textiles, and their peerless blades. The dwarves offered their peerless masonry, their intricate metalwork, and their tireless labor in the delving and shaping of Menegroth itself. This alliance was the foundation of the strength of Beleriand against the encroaching darkness of the north. But how could such a bond, forged over countless centuries, be so utterly destroyed? The answer begins not with an army, but with two treasures. The first was the Nauglamír, the necklace of the dwarves. It had been made ages before by the smiths of Nogrod for the elven lord Finrod Felagund, and it was the most renowned of all their works in the elder days. A carcanet of gold and gems, its beauty was legendary. After the fall of Finrod's kingdom of Nargothrond, it was brought by the grim hero Hurin to King Thingol, a treasure rescued from the hoard of a dragon. The second treasure was infinitely greater. It was a Silmaril, one of the three hallowed jewels made by Fëanor, the greatest of all elven craftsmen. It contained the pure, unblemished light of the two trees of Valinor, which had been destroyed by the first Dark Lord Morgoth. This specific jewel had been cut from Morgoth's iron crown by the mortal hero Beren, as a bride price for the hand of Thingol's own daughter Luthien. It was a star made manifest, a piece of the world's lost dawn, and its light was holy. And in the heart of King Thingol, a thought took root. It was a thought born of pride and artistic desire, a seed that would blossom into ruin. He possessed the two greatest treasures ever crafted by elves and by dwarves. He looked upon the peerless necklace, and he looked upon the living light, and he conceived a desire to merge them. He would set the Silmaril in the midst of the Nauglamír, creating a single object of such profound and transcendent beauty that it would have no equal in all of Arda. But his own elven smiths, skilled as they were, confessed that such a task was beyond them. To rework the ancient and cunning design of the Nauglamír without marring it, and to set within it the hallowed Silmaril, was a feat that required the singular mastery of its original creators. So Thingol sent word to the Blue Mountains. He summoned the most skillful smiths of Nogrod to his halls, promising a reward beyond their richest dreams if they would undertake this great work for him. And they came. A company of the finest craftsmen in all the world journeyed from their mountain halls, through the guarded forests of Doriath, and into the subterranean splendor of Menegroth. When they were brought before Thingol and shown the two treasures, they were filled with a deep and silent awe. They marveled at the beauty of their father's work in the Nauglamír. But it was the Silmaril that seized their hearts. A great fire of desire was kindled within them, a lust to possess the stone of Fëanor that held the light of paradise. They hid their dark thoughts well. They consented to the task, and Thingol had a great forge prepared for them within the city itself. There, in the deep places of Menegroth, they set to their labor. For a long while the sound of their hammers was heard, and all who passed by the smithy knew that a work of wonder was being made. The dwarves poured all their ancient skill, all their secret knowledge of metal and stone, into the refashioning of the necklace. The gold was woven into new and more subtle patterns. The gems were reset to catch and refract the light in ways previously unimagined. And at its very center, they mounted the Silmaril. When at last the work was done, the result was beyond all reckoning. The new Nauglamír was a thing of pure magic and light. The ancient beauty of the dwarven necklace was enhanced beyond measure, and all its gems drew in the light of the Silmaril, reflecting it back in 1,000 radiant colors. The Silmaril itself, set in this glorious frame, shone with a new and breathtaking splendor. It was the greatest treasure on this side of the sea. But as they toiled, the lust in the hearts of the dwarves had grown into a burning obsession. The sight of the Silmaril, the feel of it in their hands, had driven them to madness. They had no intention of letting it go. They brought the necklace to Thingol and laid it before him. He was overjoyed, seeing his grandest vision brought to life. He reached out to take it, but the dwarves stood in his way. They declared that he had no right to it. The Nauglamír, they claimed, was the work of their fathers, given to Finrod, who was now dead. They, the smiths of Nogrod, were its rightful heirs. As for the Silmaril, they made the audacious claim that its recovery by Bedouin was an act of theft, and that Thingol, as the keeper of stolen goods, had no true claim of ownership. Their legal arguments were a tissue of lies, a thin veil for the raw, all-consuming greed that now commanded them. They demanded that Thingol surrender the necklace to them as payment for their labor. Thingol's pride was as vast as his kingdom. He had lived for ages uncounted, and ruled as one of the great kings of the world. He was not accustomed to being challenged, least of all by craftsmen he considered his employees. His own love for the Silmaril, which had now become a dark obsession, flared into a cold and terrible rage. He looked down upon the dwarves, upon their squat forms and their grasping hands, and he saw only insolence. He spoke, his voice filled with scorn. "How do ye of uncouth race dare to demand aught of me? Elu Thingol, lord of Beleriand, whose life began by the waters of Quivian years uncounted ere the fathers of the stunted people awoke." His words were a fatal error. He belittled their entire race. "Begone from my halls without payment," he commanded, his voice ringing with authority. "For I am gracious that ye have been suffered to return safe to your own mountain homes. Be thankful I do not have you cast out as thieves." The insult, and the threat, was too much. The dwarves, secret lust for the jewel, now stoked by the fire of the king's scorn, erupted into open, murderous fury. They had been surrounded by the majesty of Morgoth, but here, in the king's deepest treasury where he had come to claim the jewel, he was alone with them. There were no guards within earshot. They forgot their awe. They forgot their fear. They saw only the haughty king and the priceless jewel he wore. In that moment, a red madness seized them. They swarmed him. Thingol stood tall, unarmed and unprepared, a king in his own sacred vault. The dwarves of Nogrod, master smiths and artisans, closed in around him. They raised the heavy hammers of their trade, the very tools that had just finished the most beautiful object in the world. The holy light of the Silmaril, now clasped around Thingol's neck, illuminated their grim, determined faces as they moved in for the kill. And in the sacred silence of the treasury, beneath the earth and stone of his own kingdom, they fell upon him and slew him. The great King Thingol, Elu, king of Doriath, mightiest of all the Sindar, died there in a pool of his own blood, with the greatest of all jewels as the last thing his eyes beheld. The dwarves did not linger. With the blood of a king on their hands and the supreme treasure of the world in their grasp, they fled. They burst from the treasury, slaying any who stood in their path, and ran like wolves through the stone-carved splendors of Morgoth. The alarm was raised. Horns echoed through the 1,000 caves. The elves of Doriath, shaken from their ageless peace, were seized by a horrified rage. Their king, who had ruled for time out of mind, was murdered within his own halls by his hired craftsmen. But we must pause. We must ask the question that echoes down through the ages of Middle-earth. How could this happen? Was it truly just the base greed of a few dwarves, magnified by a king's foolish pride? Or was there a deeper, more venomous power at work? To understand the cataclysm, we must look not only at the hearts of dwarves and elves, but at the very history of the gold itself. Remember, this was no ordinary gold. The Nauglamír had been reforged using the cursed treasure of Nargothrond. This was the hoard of the dragon Glaurung, a hoard poisoned for centuries by his malice and his master Morgoth's evil. The dragon's curse lay upon it still, a curse that bred avarice and mistrust, turning friend against friend and brother against brother. Hurin had brought that treasure to Doriath, believing it a gift, but in truth he had delivered a serpent into Thingol's heart. Was it this ancient dragon curse, now bound to the Silmaril's holy light, that finally drove the dwarves to their red madness? Or was the curse even older? Was it the very act of Fëanor who poured his pride and his possessive fire into the Silmarils that doomed all who would touch them? Perhaps it was all of these things. A perfect storm of greed, pride, and ancient evil, converging in one moment of unspeakable violence. In the halls of Menegroth, these questions mattered little. There was only grief, a grief so vast and so profound, it began to unmake the world. Queen Melian, the Maya, who had held Doriath in her love and protection for thousands of years, sat beside the body of her slain husband. Her power had always been tied to her will, to her love for Thingol, and for the land they had built together. But with Thingol's death, her will broke. The light in her eyes faded. The sorrow of an immortal being is a terrible thing to behold, a winter that kills all hope. And as her heart broke, so too did her greatest work. The girdle of Melian, that unseen wall of mist and shadow that had guarded the borders of Doriath for centuries, faltered. It was a fence of enchantment woven from her power and her will, and with her will now shattered, the threads began to unravel. For the first time since the rising of the sun, the hidden kingdom of Doriath lay open and vulnerable, its secret paths and its deep hallowed halls exposed to the eyes of its enemies. The greatest defense the elves had ever known was gone, washed away in a tide of sorrow. But the immediate threat was not from without, but from within. The elves of Doriath, under the command of Moblung of the Heavy Hand, pursued the fleeing murderers with a terrible vengeance. The dwarves were great warriors, but they were vastly outnumbered, and far from their mountain homes. The hunt was swift and merciless through the forests. One by one, the dwarven company was cornered and cut down. They fought with the desperation of cornered animals, but the skill and wrath of the elves was too great. At last, nearly the entire company was slain. The Nauglamír, sullied with the blood of its makers and its last owner, was recovered from their grasp and brought back in sorrow to Menegroth. Yet the tragedy was not yet complete. In the chaos and bloodshed of the pursuit, 2 of the dwarven assassins managed to escape the hunters. They slipped through the elven cordon, wounded and exhausted, and began the long, hard journey back east to their home in the Blue Mountains. They were all that remained of the proud company of smiths, and they carried with them not the treasure they had coveted, but something far more dangerous. A story twisted by their own guilt and malice. A lie that they would tell their king. They would not speak of their greed or their murderous betrayal. They would speak of treachery, of a great elven king who lured their finest craftsmen to his realm only to cheat them of their wages and murder them in cold blood to steal their work. And so, in the great mountain city of Nógrad, a poison took root. The tale told by the 2 survivors, polished by malice and shame, became a war song, a saga of elven treachery and dwarven martyrdom. Grief for their slain kin turned to a cold, unbending wrath that burned in the heart of the mountain. In Doriath, there was a brief, sorrowful peace. Queen Melian, her purpose in Middle-earth now ended, passed into the west, and the land grew gray with her going. But Dior, son of Beren and Luthien, Thingol's heir, came from the south, with his wife Nimloth and their children. He took up his grandfather's crown, and for a short while it seemed the glory of Doriath might be rekindled. But a fire lit by lies cannot be easily quenched. The army of the dwarves of Nógrad fell upon Doriath without warning. No girdle of Melian now stood to confuse and confound them. They marched into the forest of Neldoreth with open hate, and the second battle for Doriath was fought in its ancient halls. The slaughter was terrible. The elves fought with the desperate valor of those defending their homes, but the dwarves came on with the fury of vengeance, their heavy armor and great axes breaking the elven lines. In the 1,000 caves of Menegroth, elf and dwarf died in bitter heaps, and the light of that ancient realm was drowned in blood. Dior himself fought to the last, a light of vengeance in his eyes for the slaying of his grandsire. But he too was slain in the heart of his kingdom, and with him fell Nimloth his queen. The dwarves seized the Nauglamír from his body, their quest for vengeance and avarice finally complete. The greatest kingdom of the Sindar was no more. Yet the curse of the jewel was not yet finished. A remnant of the elves, led by Dior's young daughter Elwing, escaped the ruin and fled south, carrying with them the Silmaril, saved once more from the darkness. And the dwarves, marching home laden with the entire treasury of Doriath, were themselves ambushed and destroyed by Beren and the green elves of Osiriand. The stolen treasure of Doriath sank into the river Ascar, but Beren himself took the Nauglamír, the final prize in the war his own love had begun so long ago. The fall of Doriath was an end, but also a beginning. An ending for a great and glorious kingdom, but the beginning of the final chapter in the war for the Silmarils. The oath of Fëanor still lay upon the world, its shadow reaching out for the last remnant of his holy light, now guarded by a fugitive princess. The sons of Feanor would hear of its survival, and their terrible oath would drive them to commit their last and most sorrowful kinslaying. The doom of the elves was not yet complete. The tale of fire and blood continues. The greatest tales of Middle-earth are forged in sorrow, victory, and loss. To witness the final fate of the Silmarils and the dawn of a new age, subscribe now to the _Silmarillion_Chronicles.